On April 15, 1974, a security camera inside the Hibernia Bank in San Francisco captured something that no one in America could explain. A young woman, 19 years old, standing in the middle of a bank robbery, holding a semi-automatic carbine across her chest, her face hard, her stance wide, her finger near the trigger. Her name was Patricia Campbell Hearst. 2 months earlier, she had been dragged screaming from her apartment by a group of strangers, blindfolded, thrown into the trunk of a car, and locked inside a closet for 57 days. She was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, one of the richest and most powerful men in American history. She was a sophomore in college. She was engaged. She had never held a gun in her life. And now, she was robbing a bank. The photograph from that security camera became one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. And the question it raised, was she a victim or was she a criminal, would tear America apart. It still hasn't been answered. To understand what happened to Patty Hearst, you first have to understand what she came from. Because the distance between who she was and who she became is what made this story impossible for America to process. The Hearst family wasn't just wealthy. They were American royalty, the kind of wealth that doesn't just buy things, it shapes the country. William Randolph Hearst, Patty's grandfather, had built a media empire unlike anything America had ever seen. At its peak, he controlled 28 major newspapers, 18 magazines, several radio stations, and a newsreel company that shaped how Americans understood their own country. He didn't just report the news. There were people who believed he manufactured it. There's a famous story, debated by historians but widely repeated, that Hearst told a photographer in Cuba, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." Whether or not he actually said it, the fact that people believed he could says everything about the kind of power this family wielded. His estate at San Simeon on the central California coast had 165 rooms, 127 acres of gardens, indoor and outdoor swimming pools decorated with Roman temple columns, and a private zoo stocked with zebras, polar bears, and elephants. It was so extravagant that Orson Welles used it as the inspiration for Xanadu in Citizen Kane, a film widely considered one of the greatest ever made. When you said the name Hearst in America, people didn't think of a family, they thought of power itself. Patty was born into the third generation of that power, February 20th, 1954. Her father, Randolph Apperson Hearst, ran the San Francisco Examiner, one of the family's flagship newspapers. Her mother, Catherine, was a university regent and philanthropist who sat on the boards of institutions across California. They lived in Hillsborough, a town on the San Francisco Peninsula where the average home sat on several acres, and the neighbors were oil executives, shipping magnates, and old California money. The kind of place where people didn't lock their doors, not because crime didn't exist, but because it had never occurred to them that it could reach them. Patty attended private schools, Crystal Springs Uplands, then Santa Catalina in Monterey, a Catholic girls' school run by Dominican nuns overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She was quiet, not rebellious, not political, not particularly interested in the family empire or the weight it carried. Her classmates remembered her as pleasant, unremarkable, a girl who followed the rules without questioning them and seemed content to let life carry her wherever it was going. In 1972, she enrolled at the University of California, Berkeley. And here, for the first time, the world she'd grown up in began to collide with a world she'd never been told about. Berkeley in the early 1970s was one of the most politically charged places in America. The Vietnam War was still grinding forward, and the campus had been a center of anti-war protest for nearly a decade. The free speech movement had been born there. Students had clashed with police. The National Guard had once fired tear gas from helicopters over the campus. The counterculture, which had started with peace signs and flowers, had curdled into something darker. Revolutionary cells, underground armies, a conviction among a small but committed fringe that the American system could not be reformed. It had to be destroyed. Patty didn't engage with any of that. She moved in with her fiancé, Stephen Weed, a 26-year-old graduate student who had been her math teacher at Crystal Springs. The age gap raised eyebrows then, and it raises more now, but at the time it seemed unremarkable in their social circle. They lived in a modest apartment at 2603 Benvenue Avenue. She studied art history. She planned a wedding. She cooked dinner. She lived in one of the most politically volatile cities in America and seemed entirely untouched by it. She was 19 years old, and the most dangerous thing she had ever done was skip a class. The world outside her apartment was on fire. Students marching, buildings occupied, tear gas drifting across Sproul Plaza, and Patty Hearst moved through it all like a tourist passing through someone else's war. She and Weed ate dinner together, watched television together, lived a life so ordinary it could have belonged to any young couple in any quiet suburb in any decade. That ordinariness is important because what was about to happen to her only makes sense, only carries its full horror, if you understand how completely unprepared she was for it. She had no framework for violence, no experience of powerlessness, no context for what it means to lose control of your own life. She had never been hungry. She had never been truly afraid. She had never been in a room where someone else decided whether she lived or died. That was about to change in a way no one could have imagined. On the night of February 4th, 1974, at approximately 9:15 in the evening, Patty and Stephen were at home. There was a knock at the door. When Weed opened it, 3 people forced their way in, 2 men and a woman, carrying weapons. They beat Weed with a wine bottle until he collapsed, bleeding on the floor. They grabbed Patty, who was wearing only a bathrobe, screaming and fighting. They blindfolded her, dragged her out of the apartment, and neighbors watched as she was shoved, still screaming, into the trunk of a stolen convertible. Gunshots were fired into the air to keep anyone from intervening. The car disappeared into the Berkeley night. Within hours, every newsroom in San Francisco was on it. By morning, it was national news. By the following day, the entire country knew. The kidnappers called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA. If you've never heard of the SLA, there's a reason. They were tiny, never more than about a dozen members. They were not well known before this night. Their leader was Donald DeFreeze, an escaped convict from Cleveland who had reinvented himself as a revolutionary and adopted the name Field Marshal Cinque after Shungbei Pie, the leader of the Amistad slave rebellion. DeFreeze was charismatic in the way that cult leaders often are, not brilliant, but absolute in his certainty, and surrounded by people who needed certainty more than they needed truth. The rest of the group was a strange mix. College-educated white radicals from middle-class families, a few former prisoners, people who had drifted through the anti-war movement, through communes, through various shades of leftist politics, and ended up in a place where armed revolution seemed like the only answer. They had a 7-headed cobra as their symbol, and a motto that translated roughly to, quote, death to the fascist insect that preys upon the life of the people. They had already committed a murder. In November of 1973, they had assassinated Marcus Foster, the superintendent of schools in Oakland. A black man, an educator, a reformer, shot with cyanide-tipped bullets on a public street. Their reason was that Foster had supported a student identification card program, which they called fascist surveillance. The killing was senseless. It alienated virtually everyone, including the radical left who saw Foster as an ally. The SLA had proven they were willing to kill. They had not proven they were willing to think. And now they had taken the granddaughter of one of the most powerful families in the country. But what happened next is where the story stops making any kind of easy sense. For 57 days, Patty Hearst was held in a closet. It was roughly 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, barely large enough to lie down, a coffin with a door. Her eyes were blindfolded around the clock. Her hands were often bound. She was let out only to use the bathroom, and even then she was blindfolded and guided by her captors. The psychological assault was relentless. She was told her family didn't care about her, that her father was a fascist, that the Hearst fortune was built on the exploitation of working people, that no one was coming to rescue her, that the FBI was going to storm the hideout and kill everyone inside, including her, and that her father would let it happen because she was worth more to him as a dead martyr than a living daughter. She was sexually assaulted by DeFries and by another member, Willie Wolfe. This was not disputed at trial. It was presented as part of her revolutionary education, the SLA's term for it. She was starved, given just enough food to stay conscious. She was disoriented, kept in total darkness with no way to distinguish day from night. She lost track of time. She lost track of herself. And through all of it, she was fed a relentless stream of revolutionary ideology. Hour after hour, day after day. For nearly 2 months. The same voices, the same arguments, the same conclusion. Everything you were before was a lie. And the only truth is the revolution. Psychiatrists would later describe what happened to her as a textbook case of coercive persuasion. The systematic destruction of an individual's sense of identity, followed by the construction of a new one. First, you break the person down, strip away everything they know, their name, their family, their history, their sense of self. You make them believe that everything they were before was a lie, and then, into that emptiness, you pour a new identity, new beliefs, new loyalties, a new name. The SLA demanded that the Hearst family distribute millions of dollars worth of food to the poor in the San Francisco Bay Area. Randolph Hearst complied. He established a program called People in Need and put up $6 million, an enormous sum. Food was distributed at locations across San Francisco and Oakland, but the distributions were chaotic. People rushed the trucks. Fights broke out. In one incident, a truck was nearly overturned. The SLA watched on television and called it a crumb from the master's table. Nothing was ever going to be enough. And then, on April 3, 1974, a tape recording arrived at a radio station in San Francisco. The voice on it was Patty Hearst's, but the words were not the words of a kidnapping victim pleading for rescue. She announced that she had joined the Symbionese Liberation Army voluntarily, that she had taken a new name, Tania, after Tamara Bunk, a companion of Che Guevara who had died fighting in Bolivia. She called her family the Pig Hearsts. She denounced her former fiancé. She declared that she had chosen to stay and fight. America didn't know what to make of it. Was she brainwashed? Was she reading a script at gunpoint? Had she actually been radicalized, transformed from a quiet college girl into a revolutionary soldier in less than 60 days? And what happened next would make everything more complicated. 12 days after that tape, on April 15th, the security cameras at the Hibernia Bank provided something no recording could: visual proof. There was Patty Hearst, beret on her head, carbine in her hands, sweeping the room with the barrel of a weapon, participating in an armed robbery alongside the people who had kidnapped her. $10,000 was taken. 2 bystanders were shot. The entire robbery lasted 90 seconds. The entire robbery was captured on film from multiple angles. The photograph from that camera, Patty Hearst in profile, beret tilted, rifle held with both hands, her jaw set, circled the globe within hours. It was on the cover of Time, Newsweek, the front page of the New York Times, and the nation split in two. Some people looked at that photograph and saw a terrified young woman, coerced at gunpoint, performing for her captors to stay alive. Others saw a spoiled rich girl who had discovered excitement in revolution and turned her back on everything she'd been given. There was no middle ground. You saw one thing or the other, and what you saw said as much about you as it did about her. But what the jury didn't know yet would change everything. On May 17, 1974, the Los Angeles Police Department surrounded an SLA safe house at 1466 East 54th Street in South Central Los Angeles. What followed was one of the most extraordinary events in American law enforcement history, and it was broadcast live in its entirety on national television. Over 9,000 rounds were fired in a gun battle that lasted nearly 2 hours. The house caught fire. The LAPD did not allow the fire department to approach. 6 SLA members burned alive inside, including Donald DeFreeze. 50 million Americans watched it happen in real time. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Families sat in their living rooms and watched a house burn to the ground with people inside it live as it happened. It was one of the first moments in American history when violence on that scale was consumed as entertainment, broadcast without delay, without editing, without anyone asking whether it should be shown at all. Patty Hearst was not in the house. She was in a motel room across town with Bill and Emily Harris, 2 surviving SLA members. She watched the siege on a small television screen. She later testified that she screamed, that she wanted to die, that she believed everyone she had come to depend on, captors, torturers, companions, whatever they were to her by then, had just been killed in front of her eyes. But she didn't turn herself in. She didn't call her parents. She didn't walk into a police station or an FBI office and say, "It's over, I want to come home." Instead, she ran. For the next 16 months, Patty Hearst lived as a fugitive. She and the Harrises crisscrossed the country, moving from safe house to safe house. She changed her name. She cut her hair and dyed it red. She lived in apartments in San Francisco, in Sacramento, in rural Pennsylvania. She was around people who were not always watching her. She passed through public spaces. She had, by any reasonable assessment, opportunities to escape. She didn't take them. Or she couldn't take them, depending on what you believe. During this time, she participated in at least one additional crime, a robbery at a sporting goods store in Inglewood, California, during which shots were fired. No one was killed, but the incident would later undermine her defense. On September 18, 1975, 19 months after her kidnapping, the FBI found Patty Hearst in a San Francisco apartment on Morse Street. She was arrested without resistance, but when she was booked, she gave her occupation as urban guerrilla. In her booking photograph, she raised a clenched fist, the revolutionary salute. That photograph became almost as famous as the one from the bank. The trial of Patricia Campbell Hearst began on February 4, 1976, exactly 2 years to the day after she was kidnapped. The courtroom was a federal building in San Francisco. The charge was armed bank robbery, and the question that hung over every minute of the proceedings was simple to state and perhaps impossible to answer. Did she do it of her own free will? Her defense attorney was F. Lee Bailey, one of the most famous trial lawyers in the country. Bailey had defended the Boston Strangler. He had represented Sam Shepard in his successful appeal. He would later join O.J. Simpson's defense team 2 decades down the line. He was theatrical, confident, and utterly convinced that he could win any case put in front of him. Bailey's strategy rested on a single, powerful argument. Patty Hearst had been kidnapped, blindfolded, locked in a closet for 57 days, starved, sexually assaulted, psychologically tortured, and had her identity systematically destroyed. What the SLA had done to her was not recruitment, it was demolition. They had taken a person apart and built something else in her place. She didn't rob the bank because she believed in revolution. She robbed the bank because after 2 months in that closet, she no longer knew who she was. She no longer had a self to make a choice with. The defense brought expert witnesses who testified about brainwashing, about coercive control, about the well-documented effects of prolonged captivity and isolation on the human mind. They invoked Stockholm Syndrome, a term that had been coined just the year before Patty's kidnapping, after a bank siege in Stockholm, Sweden, where hostages had formed emotional bonds with the men who held them at gunpoint. The Hearst case would become the most famous example of that phenomenon in history. For millions of people, Stockholm Syndrome and Patty Hearst would become synonymous. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. United States Attorney James Browning argued that Patty Hearst had been given multiple chances to leave the SLA and had not taken them. That during the 16 months between the Los Angeles shootout and her arrest, she was, for all practical purposes, free. That she had willingly participated in crimes beyond the bank robbery. That she had made tape recordings denouncing her family in terms that went far beyond anything a captive would be forced to say. That the clenched fist at her booking, the revolutionary name, the stated occupation of urban guerrilla, these were not the reflexes of a broken captive performing under duress. They were the choices of a willing participant. Browning put it bluntly. If Patty Hearst had been kidnapped by a motorcycle gang and then participated in a bank robbery, no one would be talking about brainwashing. The only reason this defense existed was because she was rich and because her family could afford F. Lee Bailey. The prosecution's argument cut deep because it touched something real, the sense that wealth creates its own justice. That a poor woman in the same situation would have been convicted without a second thought, and no one would have written a book about it. The trial lasted 40 days. The courtroom was packed, every single one of them. Reporters from around the world filled the gallery. Sketch artists drew furiously. Outside, camera crews set up permanent positions on the courthouse steps. It was the most watched trial in America since the Lindbergh kidnapping case 4 decades earlier. And then Patty Hearst took the stand. Bailey expected her to be sympathetic, a fragile young woman telling her story of captivity and terror. Instead, she was guarded, evasive, and invoked the Fifth Amendment 42 times. She seemed less like a victim and more like someone with something to hide. Many legal observers believe her testimony sealed her conviction. The jury deliberated for 12 hours. On March 20th, 1976, they returned their verdict: guilty. The courtroom erupted. Patty Hearst's mother collapsed. Her father sat rigid, staring forward. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions into the chaos. The verdict was on every television screen in America within minutes. Judge William Orrick sentenced her to 7 years in federal prison. Bailey, who had never doubted he would win, was visibly stunned. He later called it the worst defeat of his career. The case that was supposed to cement his legacy instead began to unravel it. The reaction split the country along lines that had nothing to do with the evidence and everything to do with class. Working-class Americans, by and large, felt justice had been served. A rich girl committed a crime and got punished for it. If she'd been black, if she'd been poor, there would have been no brainwashing defense. She would have just gone to prison, and nobody would have argued about it. Others, particularly those who studied the psychology of captivity and coercion, were horrified. They argued that a 19-year-old girl had been kidnapped, tortured, sexually assaulted, and psychologically dismantled, and then punished for what her captors had turned her into. That the jury had missed the most fundamental truth about coercive control. It works precisely because the victim appears to be willing. That's not a flaw of the method. That's the point of it. The debate went on for years. It went on in living rooms and law schools and op-ed pages and congressional offices. Psychologists wrote papers about it. Legal scholars built entire courses around it. Filmmakers made documentaries about it. And ordinary Americans argued about it at kitchen tables across the country. Not because they cared about Patty Hearst specifically, but because her case asked them a question they couldn't answer about themselves. If you were locked in a closet for 57 days, starved and assaulted and told everything you believed was a lie, what would you become? Would you hold on to who you were? Are you sure? Nobody is ever sure. And that's why the debate never reached a resolution. Patty Hearst served 22 months. In January of 1979, President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. She walked out of prison and into a life that no one, not the prosecution, not the defense, not America, could have predicted. She married Bernard Shaw, a police officer who had served as her bodyguard during the trial. They moved to a quiet neighborhood in Connecticut. She raised 2 daughters. She appeared in films by John Waters, the cult filmmaker known for deliberate provocation, playing socialites and housewives with a dry, deadpan humor that suggested she understood the absurdity of her own story better than anyone. She became a regular on the dog show circuit, entering her French bulldogs in national competitions. She attended charity events. She gave almost no interviews. She lived by every outward measure a completely ordinary upper-class American life. In 2001, on his very last day in office, President Bill Clinton granted Patty Hearst a full and unconditional pardon. The conviction was erased from her record. Legally, it was as though the bank robbery had never happened. 2 presidents from opposite parties, decades apart, had each decided that whatever Patty Hearst had done, she had been punished enough. Or perhaps that whatever had been done to her, no amount of punishment could address. But the question was not erased. And it never will be. What happened to Patty Hearst? Was she a victim of one of the most extreme cases of psychological coercion in modern history? A teenage girl kidnapped, locked in a coffin-sized closet, assaulted, and stripped of her identity until she became someone else entirely? Or was she a willing participant, a young woman from extraordinary privilege who discovered, in the most improbable circumstances, a cause that gave her life a meaning her family's fortune never had? The honest answer, the only honest answer, is that we don't know. We may never know. It's possible that Patty Hearst herself doesn't fully know. What we do know is that the case changed the country. It forced a national conversation about the limits of free will, about what captivity and isolation do to the human mind, about whether a person can be held criminally responsible for actions taken under extreme psychological duress. Courts, psychologists, legal scholars, and ethicists have debated these questions for half a century, and they still haven't settled them. We also know that the case exposed something uncomfortable about American justice. The Hearst family's wealth and connections were present at every stage. The $6 million ransom, the hiring of the most expensive defense lawyer in the country, the presidential commutation, the presidential pardon. If Patty Hearst had been Patricia Johnson from East Oakland, a poor girl, a black girl, kidnapped by a different group, would any of those things have happened? Would anyone have argued about Stockholm Syndrome? Or would she have disappeared into the federal prison system and nobody would have made a documentary about it? And perhaps that's the hardest truth of the Patty Hearst story. Not whether she was a victim or a criminal, but who gets to be called a victim in the first place. Patty Hearst is alive today. She is in her early 70s. She lives quietly. She does not give interviews about the kidnapping. She has written one memoir, published decades ago, and rarely speaks publicly about anything that happened between February of 1974 and her release from prison. The security camera photograph from the Hibernia Bank, that frozen, grainy image of a young woman with a beret and a carbine rifle standing in the middle of something that should never have been her life, remains one of the most recognizable images of the 20th century. It has been reproduced on magazine covers, in textbooks, in documentaries, in art exhibitions. It has become a symbol, though no one can agree of what. Of brainwashing, of rebellion, of privilege, of vulnerability, of the terrifying plasticity of the human mind. And America still looks at it and sees two completely different things. Some see a girl who was stolen. Some see a girl who chose to stay. The case of Patricia Campbell Hearst was never really about one woman. It was about the stories America tells itself, about guilt and innocence, about choice and coercion, about who deserves sympathy and who deserves punishment. It was about the moment when a country that believed in simple answers was forced to confront a question that didn't have one. We like to think we know ourselves. We like to believe that under pressure we would hold firm, that our values are bedrock, not sand, that we are who we are no matter what. Patty Hearst's story asks a simple question: are you sure about that? And 50 years later, the jury is still out.